Bright lights illuminated Oprah Winfrey as she stepped confidently onto the stage at the National Policy Forum. Dressed in a refined purple pantsuit, she carried the poise and assurance that have long defined her public image. The audience, filled with policy experts, journalists, and government leaders, waited eagerly to hear her much-anticipated speech on the nation's growing moral challenges. Behind the scenes, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood composed in a crisp navy suit, quietly scrolling through her phone. Her team had just sent her an early copy of Oprah's speech that had been shared with select media outlets. As she read, Crockett's expression tightened. The address seemed to twist her voting record and portray her policies unfairly. Moments earlier, the moderator had introduced Oprah with glowing praise. A voice of a generation, a self-made icon who understands the heart of America. The crowd responded with thunderous applause as Oprah began to speak. "Our leaders have let us down," she said with conviction. "Figures like Jasmine Crockett support measures that pull us apart instead of bringing us together." Backstage, Crockett watched the live feed closely. Her press secretary leaned over and murmured, "We didn't expect her to mention you by name." Crockett stayed calm, her tone steady. "It's all right," she replied. "I'm ready for this." This wasn't just another public event. It was shaping up to be a turning point. Jasmine Crockett, a determined congresswoman from Texas, was about to show that even the most admired public figures must answer for their words. What happened next would leave the audience speechless and change how both women were seen for years to come. Before we dive into this powerful exchange, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real, unfiltered moments from the world of politics. Stories that often don't make it to the mainstream spotlight. Inside the convention hall, the air was charged with excitement. People leaned forward in their seats, phones raised high, recording every second. Oprah stood at the center, the focus of thousands of eyes. For decades, she had been America's voice of compassion, a woman who rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most influential figures in media and culture. But this day was unlike any other. She wasn't there to inspire through giveaways or heartfelt interviews. Her tone was serious, her mission clear. She wanted to talk about what she described as the deep political divide weakening the country. With the poise of someone who has spent a lifetime on stage, Oprah began to walk slowly across the platform. Her voice carried a steady emotion that instantly captured the crowd's attention. "I've spent my life listening to Americans from all walks of life," she said firmly. "And what I'm hearing now truly concerns me. Too many leaders, including Representative Crockett, have stepped away from balance. They speak in extremes, label anyone who disagrees, and avoid taking true responsibility for their actions." The audience listened intently, some nodding in agreement, others whispering in surprise. It was clear this speech would spark a conversation far beyond that hall. On the large screens behind the stage, a series of edited clips from Jasmine Crockett's congressional hearings began to play. The footage had been carefully trimmed to make her passionate arguments appear overly forceful and confrontational. The crowd, made up mostly of Oprah supporters and moderate policymakers, watched quietly, many nodding in agreement with the narrative being shown. Oprah continued her address, her tone firm but disappointed. "Just last month," she said, shaking her head slightly, Representative Crockett stood in the way of a bipartisan bill meant to support working families, all because it didn't fit her personal vision. This kind of my way or no way approach is exactly what's keeping Washington stuck. Backstage, Jasmine Crockett remained composed, though the tension in her posture was hard to miss. At 44, she had already built an impressive record as a respected attorney, civil rights advocate, and later, a dedicated lawmaker. A Harvard Law graduate, she had spent years in Texas courtrooms defending voting rights and challenging systemic unfairness long before stepping into the national spotlight. For Crockett, politics was never about personal power. It was about serving the people who trusted her to fight for them. Her chief of staff quietly approached, handing her a tablet showing social media posts already trending under the hashtag #OprahWisdom. "They've been planning this narrative for weeks," he whispered. "Word is, Oprah might not have even read the full bill she's criticizing." Crockett took a deep breath, opened the legislation on her phone, and began reviewing it line by line. "Then she's either been misled," she said evenly, or she's choosing to ignore the truth. That bill included a hidden clause that would have taken away essential protections for our most vulnerable communities. She looked up, her expression calm but resolute. Whatever came next, she was ready to set the record straight, not just for herself, but for the people she represented. "We never opposed helping families," Crockett said quietly. "We opposed the hidden details that would have taken that help away." A production assistant approached carefully, headset in place, and spoke in a low voice. "Congresswoman, you're on in 3 minutes," he reminded her. "Also, Ms. Winfrey's team asks that you stick to the pre-approved questions." Crockett gave a polite, measured smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course they did," she replied softly. Straightening her blazer, she caught her reflection in a nearby mirror and paused for a brief moment. This was no longer just about defending her voting record. It was about standing up to a growing problem. Well-known public figures simplifying serious policy issues without grasping how they affect real people. Her press secretary leaned in. "The audience might not be ready for what you're about to say," he warned. "Neither is Oprah," Crockett said calmly, slipping her phone into her pocket. On the screen were saved screenshots, records of Oprah's past statements that contradicted her current remarks. Crockett's expression was steady, her mind focused. They're all about to see that catchy quotes and edited clips can't outweigh facts and truth. As the moderator called her name, the air in the hall grew tense. Crockett took a deep, steadying breath before stepping forward. The moment carried enormous significance. This wasn't just about her reputation. It was about defending honesty and accountability in a political culture too often shaped by celebrity voices and media spin. The applause that greeted her was polite but subdued. Crockett walked to the center of the stage with quiet determination. Oprah welcomed her with a warm yet deliberate smile. For everyone watching, the contrast between the two women, the seasoned lawmaker and the media icon, was instantly clear. Something meaningful was about to unfold. On stage, the contrast between the two women was striking. Oprah Winfrey, with her world-renowned presence and polished charm, sat poised under the lights. Across from her, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett projected a calm authority, her tone measured, her words chosen with the precision of a seasoned attorney. "Representative Crockett, thank you for joining us," Oprah began, motioning toward the chair beside her. "I think we can both agree that finding common ground is crucial in today's divided world." Crockett adjusted her microphone deliberately before replying. "Thank you, Ms. Winfrey. I completely agree. Common ground is important, but it only works when it's built on truth, not on misunderstanding or misrepresentation." A quiet murmur spread through the audience. This wasn't the gentle, deferential tone most guests used when speaking with Oprah. Oprah tilted her head slightly, her expression mixing curiosity with mild surprise. "It sounds like you're on the defensive before we've even begun. Isn't that part of the challenge with compromise in Congress?" The tension in the room deepened, but Crockett remained composed. "I'm not defensive, Ms. Winfrey," she said evenly. "I'm being direct. Your viewers deserve clarity about what was said before I came on stage." Turning toward the audience, Crockett continued, her voice steady but firm. "Ms. Winfrey suggested that I blocked a bipartisan bill aimed at helping working families. What wasn't mentioned is that the bill also contained an amendment that would have reduced child care subsidies for over 300,000 families, just to make room for new corporate tax breaks." A faint shift in Oprah's expression signaled discomfort as she tried to steer the conversation. "Well, politics often involves compromise, doesn't it?" "Compromise," Crockett responded, "maintaining calm control, shouldn't come at the expense of those who need support the most. And perhaps your audience should also be aware that your own production company could have directly benefited from those same tax breaks." A sharp gasp moved through the hall. The moderator quickly attempted to intervene. "Maybe we should." Crockett raised her hand gently but firmly. "No, let's be transparent," she said. Ms. Winfrey presented this as a discussion about American values, but neglected to mention her financial interest in the very policies she's defending. Suddenly, the large screens behind them flickered, and instead of the planned video clips, they began displaying Crockett's own prepared slides. verified financial documents revealing that Oprah's investments were tied to companies that stood to gain from the proposed legislation. The room fell into stunned silence. What had begun as a moderated conversation was turning into a moment of revelation, one that no one in the audience would forget. Backstage, Congresswoman Crockett's digital team had quietly overridden the event's planned visuals. Within seconds, the large screens showed the evidence she had prepared. The technical director scrambled to switch the feed back, but the damage, or revelation, had already been done. The audience had seen it. A clear example suggesting a potential conflict of interest. For the first time that evening, Oprah Winfrey's signature composure faltered. "This is highly inappropriate," she said firmly, regaining her tone. "We're here to have a respectful conversation about unity, not to trade accusations." Crockett met her gaze evenly. "Respectful doesn't mean avoiding the truth," she replied, her voice steady but gaining strength. "And real unity begins with honesty, especially about who benefits from the policies we promote." The moderator, visibly uneasy, quickly tried to regain control. "Perhaps we can move back to the larger issue of political division," they suggested, glancing nervously toward the production team. "Gladly," Crockett said, reaching for her phone. "In fact, I'd like to share a few of Ms. Winfrey's past comments that highlight exactly how division grows." She tapped her screen, projecting a series of Oprah's past quotes, each one showing inconsistencies in her public statements about compromise and corporate accountability. The audience murmured, some surprised, others unsettled. Offstage, Oprah's production staff signaled urgently, motioning for the segment to stop. A producer leaned in toward the moderator and whispered something quickly. Moments later, the moderator cleared their throat. "We'll take a short break," they announced. Crockett raised an eyebrow. "Are we taking a break because I'm presenting facts?" she asked calmly. Her microphone was still live. The question echoed through the hall. Just before the feed went dark, as the lights came up for an unplanned intermission, the crowd buzzed with tension. Phones were out instantly, recording reactions, posting clips. Within minutes, social media exploded with hashtags like hashtag Crockett exposes Oprah and hashtag Truth on Stage. Online, opinions split sharply. Some shocked to see Oprah publicly challenged, others applauding Crockett for staying composed and standing her ground. What had begun as a discussion on unity had transformed into one of the most talked about moments in recent political memory. Backstage, Oprah's team immediately went into damage control. "This wasn't part of the agreement," her publicist said sharply to the event coordinator. She was supposed to stick to the approved discussion points. Meanwhile, in her dressing room, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett remained composed. She quietly took a sip of water, scanning her notes one last time. "They'll probably try to mute my mic," she said calmly to her staff. "Make sure Plan B is ready." When the break ended, the atmosphere in the convention hall felt entirely different. Viewers who had tuned in expecting Oprah's usual message of motivation and unity were now anticipating a serious political exchange. The tension was unmistakable as the cameras came back on. Oprah's team distributed new guidelines to the moderator. Structured questions, 2-minute time limits, and no direct back and forth between the guests. It was clear they were trying to manage the situation. But Crockett had come prepared. She walked back on stage holding a small stack of printed documents. Without hesitation, she began handing copies to the reporters seated in the front row. Oprah glanced over, her microphone still on. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly. Crockett met her eyes. "Making sure the truth isn't edited out," she said evenly. The red recording lights blinked on, and the energy in the room intensified. The moderator, visibly tense, tried to regain control by shifting the topic. "Let's move on to infrastructure spending," they suggested. But by then, the tone of the entire event had changed. Millions of viewers were witnessing something unusual. Oprah Winfrey being questioned directly and publicly. Before the next question began, Crockett leaned forward slightly. "Before we continue," she said, her voice calm but unwavering, "I think it's important to clear the air. Ms. Winfrey made several inaccurate statements about my voting record, and the audience deserves the full picture." Oprah's warm expression faded slightly as she replied, "I believe we've moved past that point, Congresswoman. Let's focus on finding solutions." Accountability isn't hostility, Crockett responded steadily. Solutions built on misinformation don't help anyone. She turned her attention to the audience, speaking with sincerity. The reaction from the audience was immediate. A wave of gasps moved across the hall, followed by a low hum of disbelief and whispered conversations. All eyes shifted between the two women on stage as Oprah's expression flickered. First surprise, then irritation, before she regained her trademark composure, offering a polite but visibly tight smile. "I think you may be missing the broader perspective here, Congresswoman," she said, her tone measured. "Policy discussions require nuance, not—" "I couldn't agree more about nuance," Crockett interrupted gently, but with unmistakable firmness. "Which is exactly why your earlier remarks caught me off guard. They seem to lack that very balance you're now calling for." She lifted her phone for everyone to see. "May I replay your statement for clarity?" she asked, though she didn't wait for an answer. With a quick tap, Oprah's earlier words echoed through the room. "Politicians like Representative Crockett have abandoned moderation. They speak in absolutes, vilify their opponents, and refuse to admit when they're wrong." The recording ended. Crockett looked directly at Winfrey, her tone steady. "That doesn't sound nuanced, Ms. Winfrey. It sounds like the same divisive language you say you want to rise above." The moderator stepped forward slightly, ready to intervene, but Crockett continued, her voice calm and deliberate. "Here's my main concern," she said, turning slightly toward the audience. "When someone with your level of influence makes statements like that, they carry enormous weight. And when those statements leave out critical facts or lack full context, they don't just damage reputations. They mislead the public about how their government truly functions." The room fell into a thoughtful silence. For the first time, the discussion wasn't about politics or publicity. It was about the power of words and the responsibility that comes with using them. The once energized crowd had gone still, the air thick with tension. Every eye in the studio was locked on the stage. Sensing the shift, Winfrey leaned into her familiar strength, emotional connection. Her voice softened, deliberate and calm. "I understand your frustration, Congresswoman," she said smoothly. "Perhaps we began on the wrong note. What I truly want is to understand your vision. Please, explain why you believe your approach is right for America." It was a signature Oprah maneuver, turning confrontation into conversation. But Crockett wasn't interested in comfort. She met the invitation with quiet resolve. "I appreciate that, Miss Winfrey," she replied evenly. "But this isn't about how either of us feels. It's about accuracy." Turning to the audience, Crockett's voice carried across the hall with measured conviction. "When public figures, especially those with immense influence, make political statements, they have an obligation to be well informed." She paused, allowing the point to land. The bill we're discussing would, yes, help some working families, but it would do so by cutting existing programs that serve our most vulnerable citizens. It gives with one hand and takes with the other. Then, with precise timing, she delivered the blow that silenced even the faint murmurs in the audience. "And here's what many of you may not know," she continued, her tone sharpening just enough to pierce the tension. "Only 3 weeks before you publicly endorsed this bill, your investment group acquired significant shares in corporations that stand to benefit directly from its passage." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in. Winfrey's practiced composure faltered for the briefest moment, a flicker of unease that didn't go unnoticed. Crockett lifted a set of neatly bound financial disclosure documents, their pages marked with fluorescent highlights. "These," she said clearly, her voice echoing across the studio, "are the same companies sponsoring this very forum." The room exploded gasps. Murmurs. Reporters in the front row leaned forward, snapping photos of the evidence Crockett had already distributed moments earlier. From backstage, Oprah's staff swarmed the set, gesturing frantically to the production crew. "This is inappropriate and potentially libelous," Winfrey protested, her voice taut, the edge of frustration breaking through her practiced calm. "You're making serious claims based on loose connections," she added, steadying her tone. Crockett didn't flinch. "These are all public records, Miss Winfrey," she replied evenly. "SEC filings, congressional archives, and your own public statements. Everything I've shared is verifiable. The moderator, visibly tense, tried to intervene. Let's pause for a moment, but Crockett pressed on. The American people deserve leaders who make decisions based on outcomes, not optics. And they deserve media figures who check facts before shaping public opinion. She turned toward the main camera, her tone calm but unyielding. Dialogue matters. Accountability matters. And most of all, facts matter. The control room erupted in chaos. The production director, reacting to frantic hand signals from Winfrey's team, ordered an unscheduled commercial break, but it was too late. The live feed had captured everything. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation spread like wildfire. Hashtag Crockett Challenge. Hashtag Hold Oprah Accountable. Both trended worldwide within the hour, in less than 15 minutes. Jasmine Crockett had done what few ever dared. She had confronted Oprah Winfrey on her own stage, armed not with emotion, but evidence. The balance of power hadn't just shifted, it had flipped. During the extended break, tension crackled backstage. Oprah's advisors circled her in hushed conversation, drafting damage control in real time. Just a few feet away, Crockett stood alone, silent, composed, methodically reviewing her notes, as if this were just another day in Congress. When the production crew announced a 2-minute countdown, the air inside the studio grew electric. Everyone, the audience, the crew, millions watching live, waited to see how America's most seasoned interviewer would recover after being cornered on her own platform. When the broadcast resumed, Oprah appeared calm and collected once more. Her years of media experience were on full display as she took a deep breath and spoke with measured grace. "Before we continue," she began evenly, "I'd like to acknowledge something important. Congresswoman Crockett raised valid concerns about the accuracy of a few statements I made earlier." Turning to Crockett, she added, "While we may interpret this legislation differently, I should have been clearer about certain details in the bill." It wasn't a full apology, but it was enough to make the audience stir. Oprah Winfrey rarely conceded ground in public. Crockett nodded, her tone gracious yet steady. "Thank you for that clarification, Miss Winfrey. I believe we both care deeply about what's best for the American people, even if our paths to getting there differ." From that point on, the tone shifted entirely. The remaining 40 minutes unfolded with a new rhythm, calm, thoughtful, and surprisingly respectful. Both women focused on facts, exploring solutions rather than sound bites. Conservative media outlets wasted no time running with the story. Headlines blazed across their pages. "Congresswoman brings receipts, leaves Oprah speechless," and Crockett exposes celebrity politics. But what truly surprised everyone was that even progressive platforms echoed similar sentiments. They framed the exchange not as a partisan victory, but as a wake-up call, a rare moment that underscored the need for honesty, preparation, and accountability when public figures wade into policy debates. Political analysts across the spectrum couldn't resist weighing in. On CNN, senior correspondent Jessica Winters commented, "What we witnessed wasn't just a politician defending her record. It was a direct challenge to how celebrity influence shapes our national conversations." Her co-panelist, Marcus Johnson, nodded in agreement. "Oprah has sat across from presidents, CEOs, and world leaders," he said, "but I've never seen her this caught off guard." Crockett came ready, not with emotion, but with evidence. And that's what shifted the balance. Commentators on other major networks echoed similar thoughts. Some praised Crockett's composure and mastery of detail, while others pointed out how the moment highlighted growing frustration with celebrity-driven narratives in politics. By the end of the evening, the confrontation had spread far beyond the realm of government or journalism. It had crossed into mainstream culture. Clips flooded talk shows, podcasts dissected the exchange, and late-night hosts couldn't resist mentioning it in their monologues. Major entertainment networks rolled out specials titled Oprah's Toughest Interview Yet, capturing the nation's fascination with seeing two powerful women collide, one representing media influence, the other political truth-telling. In less than 24 hours, what began as a televised discussion had turned into a defining cultural moment, one that would be studied, debated, and replayed for years to come. Entertainment programs quickly jumped on the story, dissecting every moment of the viral exchange. Entertainment Tonight even brought in body language experts to analyze the tension, frame by frame, between Oprah and Congresswoman Crockett. Viewers were eager to know what each expression, pause, and movement truly meant. Inside Harpo Productions, however, the mood was far from analytical. Reports described an atmosphere of unease and urgency as Oprah and her senior staff gathered for a closed-door meeting. According to one insider who spoke to Page 6, she's taking this very personally. In nearly 40 years on air, Oprah has never been caught off guard like that. The incident raised serious internal questions. How had such a massive oversight happened? And who was responsible for failing to research Crockett's background thoroughly enough to anticipate her counterpoints? Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's rise was nothing short of meteoric. Her congressional office was flooded with interview requests from every major news outlet in the country. Overnight, her social media following surged by more than 500,000, and messages of support poured in from both sides of the political aisle. Prominent policymakers and advocacy groups began reaching out, eager to collaborate with the Congresswoman who had just challenged one of America's most influential media figures and held her ground. Even more striking was the response from policy experts. Within days, the Washington Post released a detailed fact-check and policy review that largely supported Crockett's claims. Their analysis confirmed that the bill in question did include provisions that could have benefited companies tied to Oprah's investments, validating the core of Crockett's argument. 3 days later, Oprah broke her silence. In a thoughtful post across her social media platforms, she wrote, "Throughout my career, I've valued truth, growth, and learning. My recent discussion with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett has given me a lot to reflect on. While I entered that conversation with good intentions, I now understand that I didn't fully grasp the complexity of the legislation, nor did I disclose all relevant connections. I've always believed that when we know better, we do better. This is my moment to do better." The statement drew mixed reactions. Many longtime fans applauded her for showing humility and owning up to her oversight. Others, however, saw it as too little, too late, arguing that the damage to her credibility had already been done. 6 months later, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett took the stage at Harvard Kennedy School's Conference on Media, Celebrity, and Political Discourse. Her keynote address, titled Accountability in the Age of Influence, drew a full house. "The democratization of media has given more people a voice than ever before," she said. "But amplification without verification can weaken the very democracy it seeks to protect. Whether you're a first-term congresswoman or a billionaire media icon, the standard must remain the same. Claims require evidence, and influence demands responsibility." In the front row sat Oprah Winfrey, listening intently. Later that evening, the two women were photographed in deep conversation at the reception, both smiling, though neither revealed what was said. Exactly 1 year after their televised clash, they jointly announced a free online course on media literacy and policy analysis, designed to help Americans better navigate the intersection of news, entertainment, and legislation. Its first module carried a telling title, "Bringing Receipts: How to Verify Claims from Any Source." Before long, the phrase, "Do you have the Crockett receipts for that?" entered pop culture as shorthand for, "Can you back that up with facts?" High school debate teams dissected the exchange as a masterclass in preparation and precision. But beyond the memes and headlines, something deeper had shifted. A new expectation had taken hold in American discourse. No platform, no matter how beloved, was beyond fact-checking. No claim, no matter how compelling, was beyond verification. What began as a televised confrontation had evolved into something far more consequential, a recalibration of how influence and accountability coexist in modern public life. The takeaway was unmistakable. In an age of instant communication and celebrity power, facts still matter, preparation still matters, and as Jasmine Crockett proved on that stage beside one of the world's most influential women, courage backed by evidence matters most of all. That's the story behind the confrontation that reshaped the relationship between celebrity and politics. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell for more deep dive analyses of defining political moments, and tell us in the comments, which public figure do you think needs a fact check next?